closer and try to analyze the notion of freedom, you can immediately notice many paradoxes and inconsistencies. Why? Freedom appears a very simple notion. Spontaneously, we all know what it means. Freedom often hurts. It involves a painful renunciation, especially when you are doing your duty. When you are really free, it's not just about free to choose, I don't know, strawberry cake or cheesecake. It means, for example, fighting for freedom. And there you don't have the same choice. Fighting for freedom means I have to sacrifice maybe my life. I have to do something, although I am afraid of it, but basically I have no choice. I couldn't live with myself if I don't do it. In politics, freedom means to act freely within the frame of existing customs and legal regulations. But there are times when to be truly free means you have to violate the sphere of what is legally permitted. And finally, while we are free to circulate in the digital universe, does this freedom not give birth to a non-transparent universe prone to manipulations? You are as free as you can imagine. You surf along the web, you do whatever you want, but the more you do it, the more you experience how manipulated and controlled you are. I will not try to provide clear answers to all these questions. I would just try to bring out the complexity of freedom. So the first empirical observation with which I want to begin is that freedom can unite us. A whole nation can be united in a struggle for freedom. It can unite us, but at the same time, each of us has in his or her head a different concrete notion of freedom. For example, a country fights against the aggression for freedom. We are all united, we shout freedom, we are ready to die for our freedom. But it's easy to see upon a closer look that each of us means something different by it. So the best example from art of this paradox is, for me, the finale of the first act of Mozart's opera Don Giovanni, where the hero, Don Giovanni, invites his guests to a big reception and greets them with triumphant opening, Viva la libertà, long live freedom. And they all join. They are all from different strata. Poor peasants, other noblemen, and so on. It's an emphatic moment which, as it were, stops the development of the opera. They're all transfixed. But it's clear that they don't have the same idea of freedom. Now, my point here is not simply that this is a confusion. No, such moments of emphatic identification with freedom have their own efficiency. Such freedom is not just an illusion. It's illusion with real effects. They all really fight for freedom. From my own experience, I remember how here in Slovenia, when we were under, much more modest than now in Ukraine, but nonetheless, aggression from the Yugoslav army, we were also all for freedom. But immediately after we achieved independence, it was clear that each group had its own idea of freedom. For the church, freedom was freedom to get back all our possessions, freedom to organize ourselves as a central social power. For new capitalists, it was again freedom from capitalist expansion. For new leftists, it was a different thing, and so on and so on. Be careful how in every epoch, and also within the same epoch, with different strata or states, freedom means something different. As I already indicated, in pre-modern times, when people lived in a traditional way of life, freedom simply meant the freedom to live the way they were used to live, the freedom to follow their traditions without disturbance. In modernity, freedom became freedom of commerce, abstract legal freedom. For socialists, freedom is the freedom of that has to be guaranteed by certain social rights. Freedom is only actually possible, again, with healthcare, with guaranteeing minimal standards of living, free education, and so on and so on. And also today, the typical freedom today is the freedom of choice, which is often a false freedom, because the choices you are given are very limited. Like, it's a little bit like, yes, you have the freedom between Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, but if you want something more radically different. But my point here is that this is the reason that maybe the deepest ingredient of freedom is the very gap between abstract notion of freedom and concrete content of freedom. It is very good for you to experience that your concrete notion of freedom is not universal. When you become aware of this, that your concrete content of freedom, what freedom means to you, is limited, this precisely gives you the freedom to change the very contours of what freedom is for you. True freedom is precisely the freedom to change the rules under which you are free. And I think this freedom is immanent to language, human language itself. This may sound complex, but let me give you an example which I hope all of you know. Recently, in the mid-March of 2022, a video was everywhere on social media, a video clip showing a woman being arrested by the Russian police for holding up a small piece of paper that read two words, dva slova in Russian. You know, we all know what was behind it. It's prohibited to talk about war now in Russia. So, the two words were in the mind of most of Russians, "Нет войны," no to war. This was prohibited to say. So the lady, this is freedom in language, gave just on a paper two words literally. Not no to war, but two words. It was written two words. And the irony is that the police still grabbed her and arrested her. Why? It was just two words written there. Of course, everybody knew that two words meant no to war. But of course, in the concrete situation, this meant I am for peace, I am against war, but I also protest the fact that I am prohibited to say this publicly. But you see, although she supported or didn't violate censorship, she did get the message through. That's why she was arrested. And let's not forget that this freedom is the freedom of true human language. It's the freedom to make words mean almost everything that we want. In a brief scene from a British movie from mid-80s, I think Brass Off, there is a wonderful short scene of a guy accompanying a girl after a date to their home.
Do you want to come up for a coffee?
I don't drink coffee.
I haven't got any.
The erotic power of this brief exchange is wonderful. She makes it clear that she didn't mean coffee at all. It's an invitation to sex. It's clear. But what I want to say is that, you see, this is the incredible creative freedom of language. So, to conclude with two paradoxes. The first one is that the highest form of freedom, we have to accept this paradox, is the point when freedom coincides with necessity. Let's take a great artist. He is free in his or her creativity, but he doesn't really have a choice. His inventive spirit tells him, he as it were knows exactly what he has to do. So he feels totally free, but he totally follows a necessity. And isn't it the same again in love? Love, of course, has to be free, a free choice. But did you notice another paradox? That you never can give the reasons why you are in love. If I tell a lady, I like your legs and eyes, that's why I love you, it's already clear it's not love. Because then it's not freedom, it's a kind of a comparative procedure. I like your eyes, I like your legs, I like your smile. Okay, let's make a comparison, who wins? No. You fall in love for reasons, but these reasons become clear to you only after you already fall in love. And once you are in love, it's a fact, it's a necessity. Isn't this the beauty of love? That it's totally free, but at the same time, it's the most radical change that you can imagine. But it's a free change. My last point, to complicate things, I like to finish with bad news, is that at the same time, you know, the notion of freedom is self-contradictory. If you ask ordinary people, do you want to be free? Their answer would have been usually yes, of course. But then, if you look at it closely, you will see that the majority of people, me included, wouldn't really like to make radical choices all the time. What they want to maintain is the appearance of freedom. But discreetly, they want to be told what choice to make. They want to be told by media, experts, leaders, whoever, that's the right thing to do, and then they want to freely choose it in an appearance. So, you see, this is the paradox of freedom. Often to be free means to maintain the appearance of freedom and to choose what you feel is necessary. This is not a bad thing. This is how our freedom actually works. Thank you. Now I will speak about our freedom to change the past. Of course, from a scientific standpoint, the notion of changing the past is a nonsense. What happens, happens. Science describes it. And even science at its most radical. Science which, like quantum mechanics, introduces contingency into nature itself, so that nature is not fully determined by necessity. There is no space for freedom there, because freedom doesn't mean contingency. Freedom means a determinism, but a determinism of your own. Freedom means to freely choose, determine something. Like if you grab a piece of candy by chance, this is not freedom, this is contingency. But my thesis will be that nonetheless, we can freely change the past. The problem is only in what precise sense. Of course, from the scientific standpoint, freedom is ultimately what they call in cognitive sciences a user's illusion. You think that you act freely, which simply means you do what you want or what you intend, but the content is already determined by society or by neuronal processes in you. And there is even a well-known scientific experiment done already, I think, almost half a century ago by Benjamin Libet, where he scientifically, for some people, demonstrates that there is no freedom. He asked people to do something in a totally contingent free way. He had measuring apparatuses connected with your neurons, and he demonstrated that a split of a second before you decide, commands from your brain were already on the way to your head. So when you make a free decision, you just register something that was already going on. But does this cancel freedom? Libet's answer is very interesting. He claims, yes, the content of decision is predetermined by neuronal processes. But you can say no. You sabotage the decision. And that is your freedom. Your primordial form of freedom is to say no, to stop it. Then there are other attempts to save freedom. The classical one is to differentiate between many levels of reality. They claim, of course, at the elementary level of atomic interaction and so on, there is no freedom. But then nature organizes itself into animal life, human mind, and there at a higher level, there is a space for freedom. Of course, naturalist scientists would have said this is just an illusion. In reality, there is no freedom. But what I want to prove today is that in the specifically symbolic universe, the universe of human spirit, of our symbolic language interaction, there is a space for freedom. So let me introduce this dimension with a quote from one of my favorite poets. What happens when a new work of art is created is something that happens simultaneously to all the works of art which preceded it. What does this mean? Let me take the example of Shakespeare's Hamlet. I think it is wrong to read Hamlet as a great work of art which contains in itself an incredible depth, all possible variations, and so on. It's much more productive to read a great classical work of art as something unfinished in itself. Shakespeare didn't know what he is saying. Just deep thoughts came to him. He wasn't even aware what they can mean. I think that now we can know better than Shakespeare what is in Shakespeare. Great works of art are retroactively recreated all the time. The best cinema version of Hamlet, I think, is the one by the Japanese director Akira Kurosawa from early 60s, which transposes Hamlet into modern Japan, where Hamlet is a Japanese student. He returns there from United States, from the studies, and then the same story as in Hamlet. His father, the owner of a big company, is murdered, and so on and so on. But you see, this is the mystery of changing the past. After seeing this version, of course, we transpose Hamlet in a different context. The situation is totally different. But in a way, we fill in the gaps which were already there in the original. This retroactivity is crucial. Let me give you here a wonderful example, which is the favorite one, which scientifically is madness. But I think it's the best theory of ideology that I can imagine. You know, when Charles Darwin proposed his theory of evolution, one of his friends, who was a conservative theologist, saw the truth in Darwin. Yes, fossils prove that universe lasted for millions of years, that there was life on Earth before humanity, and so on. But he nonetheless, this guy, believed that the Bible is literally true. And if you count years in the Bible, our universe should have been created a little bit over 4,000 years ago. So how does this guy propose to bring together Darwinism and theology? An ingenious solution. God directly created fossils in the same way that in a movie scene you have painted background to create a false temporal opening. You know, God created the illusion of the past. Now this, of course, is scientifically nonsense. But I think it is true literally as a theory of ideology. Ideology means that every historical epoch perceives the past in a different way. Here, I would like to take an example from politics. It's my favorite example. When in 93, in Geneva, there were negotiations about how to end the Korean War, the Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai, who represented China there, was asked by a French journalist, what does he think about French Revolution? And he gave a wonderful answer. His answer was, it's too early to say. We don't yet know what was the French Revolution. And he was right, because when communist socialism disintegrated, incidentally, you remember, exactly 200 years after French Revolution. French Revolution became the beginning of an epoch, revolutionary epoch of progress, which ended in 1990. And so now, when we are fighting for freedom, we are still fighting for what the French Revolution is or was. The reality is the same. People were dying there and so on and so on. The reality is the same, but the symbolic weight of this reality changes. Let me go here even a step further and give another example from cinema which makes this clear. In the Hollywood director, who was of course an immigrant from Germany, Ernst Lubitsch, in his film Ninotchka, there is a wonderful joke mentioned there. The hero of the film visits a cafeteria and orders coffee, but he says, coffee without cream, please. And the waiter answers, sorry, I cannot give you coffee without cream because we run out of cream. But we have milk, so I can only give you coffee without milk. Now, you see the paradox. We have the same, in any case, the guest will get, we have a cup of pure black coffee. But if you order just plain coffee, this can be coffee, plain coffee, this can be coffee without cream, and this can be coffee without milk. It's physically the same, but in its symbolic impact, it's not the same. How? Why not? Let me give you a political example. The first step of feminism is always like my coffee is coffee without milk. In the sense of, in a traditional society, a woman who is trained to identify with her traditional position in a patriarchal society, a woman simply accepts her position. It's natural for me to work at home, to obey husband, and so on and so on, to be a good wife. Feminism begins when you say, I don't want just to be coffee, I experience my position as coffee without milk. That is to say, there is something which I should have, would like to have, but is not there. And the difference between multiple versions of feminism is how do you define this dimension that is missing? For predominant American Me Too feminism, unfortunately, what the woman is missing is identified in typically upper middle class term. More manager positions, less violations of women's rights, and so on. In Korea, I noticed what women were demanding was much more deeply located in everyday life. Something unimaginable in the United States happened. Women protested for multiple forms of being abused by men. There were big demonstrations against this horrible fashion of men displaying on the web naked photos of their girlfriends and so on and so on. So again, more radical feminists say no, we are not women without milk, without legal equality, we want more. We are women without cream. Cream means actual social power, responsibility, better jobs, and so on and so on. And this is what today's feminism, conflicts in feminism are about. They are about the struggle of what women are without today. You as a feminist again feel deprived of things, but what are you deprived of? It's not enough legal equality. You want social power and so on, you want much more. In this sense, we can change the past. The past remains the same. Women were exploited, all that stuff, but what the women were deprived of, so what they demand now, this is open to interpretation. The general lesson, just to conclude, is that the limit, I think, of scientific determinism is that it gets involved in what philosophers call pragmatic contradiction, which means at the level of the object that you analyze, you as a scientist can say, we don't have free will, we are totally determined by natural laws and so on. But scientists argue with arguments for them. They try to convince each other, which means that although they claim there is no free will, in their very scientific debate, they act as if they are free beings. If you are dealing with a person without freedom, you wouldn't argue with that person. Because argumentation means I think you are free to decide, you listen to arguments, and I will try to convince you. So this is a good philosophical point against natural determinism. Yes, you may be right at the level of content. You give a correct description of our biological reality. But the way we do it implies freedom. You act as free beings. Here, again, even the hardest science displays in how it proceeds freedom. I will talk now about a crucial distinction, I think, politically, between freedom and liberty. Unfortunately, it works only in English. In French, it's liberté, liberty. In German, it's Freiheit, freedom. But I think the distinction between freedom and liberty is very useful. Let me begin with another paradox of freedom. Sometimes the awareness of freedom, the awareness that I have a free choice, is precisely what prevents me from getting free of something. It guarantees that I will not change. The example here, of course, I didn't make a scientific experiment, but I checked with all of my friends, is smoking. Many smokers want to stop smoking. But you know which is the logic of excusing yourself to go on smoking? You tell to yourself, not a problem, I'm free. Anytime I can stop smoking. And you use this as an excuse never to stop smoking. You tell yourself, okay, no problem, I will stop tomorrow at any point I get the chance to stop. So you de facto never stop smoking. And my good friend Alenka Zupancic, a Slovene philosopher, proposed here a wonderful experiment. Let's say you are such a smoker who said, I'm a free being, I can smoke at any point and I can stop at any point that I want, so you use this awareness of a choice never to stop smoking. Alenka Zupancic said, but imagine a situation where somebody would make a choice more radical. Somebody, an authority, would tell you, yes, you are free to choose between smoking and not smoking, but the choice you make will oblige you to the end. That is to say, if you choose going on smoking, you will never be allowed to go back to non-smoking, and vice versa. That would be the real choice. Then you would really have to decide. And I think true freedom would be this more difficult situation, where you don't have the excuse, okay, I will decide tomorrow. You have to take the big decision now, with no chance of undoing it later. This is what happens in wars for freedom, like in Ukraine today. They're not just saying we are doing this today, tomorrow we have another choice. No, their choice is now. They have to decide now forever. Here enters the difference between liberty and freedom. This difference, I think, refers to what the German philosopher Hegel defined as the difference between abstract and concrete freedom. What we mean in our daily language as freedom is what Hegel calls concrete freedom, which means freedom whose contours are determined by the existing space of not only explicit regulations and rules, but especially even more unwritten rules. For example, that's why I, in a position which is very problematic for some, that's why I was absolutely for obligatory vaccination. Because, of course, in some abstract sense, you were not free. If the state says you must get vaccinated. But a good argument for vaccination is for me that by not getting vaccinated, you limit everyday freedom of other people. You expose them to danger and so on and so on. We are only free within a certain scope of rules. For example, let's say I'm free at the most stupid level. I'm free to go into the city, to walk around, to buy things, whatever. This presupposes that I can expect other people to follow certain rules of decency, that they will not beat me, attack me. This presupposes that everybody recognizes money, and I have normal space of social interaction. Even more important here is that to enjoy this concrete social freedom, I have to obey unwritten rules. Written rules are not enough. I think our freedom only works if me and people around me support, sustain, again, unwritten rules. What do I mean by this? One beautiful example, and there are many others, here in Europe, especially, at least in my own country, is that you have a strange phenomenon of what I call false free choice. For example, let's say that I have more money than you, and I invite you out to dinner. It's clear to both of us that I will pay. But there is a ritual in my country that when the bill arrives, you, my guest, you have to pretend, oh, let us split, let me pay, and so on. It's pure politeness. The worst thing I can do to you is to say, okay, then you pay. I mean, you know, and this is what human culture is. You make an empty offer. We both know that I will pay, but to assert our link and friendship, we have to go through this. So again, an even more radical example is language. We are only free within a language. To think freely means to totally obey the rules of language. Otherwise, you cannot even think. So this is, again, concrete freedom. Here I am radically on the left. The left is right to point out that to be free, a whole set of conditions have to be established. Like, to be free, you have to have some kind of a social health care, social welfare, and so on. Without all this, you are formally free, but in reality, you are in total danger, in constant anxiety, and so on, and so on. So this is concrete freedom. Hegel was aware of them, where liberty as concrete freedom, liberty to live the way you want within a social order, that liberty falls apart and you need the more radical freedom to act outside the contours of liberty, as in a situation of social revolt, revolution, war, and so on. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, put this in a wonderful way in a text that he wrote at the end of 1944, after France was liberated. Sartre wrote, "Never were we, French people, more free than under the German occupation. We had lost all our rights, and first of all our right to speak. They, the Germans, insulted us to our faces. And that is why the resistance was a true democracy. For the soldier, atmosphere superior. The same danger, the same loneliness." So the situation Sartre is describing, it's not of liberty. You were totally controlled by the German people, were liquidated, tortured, abducted, and so on. But in some sense, they were radically free. They had to make the radical choice, risk everything, fight for freedom. And I think the same holds now for Ukraine. They are certainly not living in liberty. Even in the parts which are not yet occupied by the Russian army, they have to obey certain discipline and so on. But since their way of life is at stake, they have to decide radically to choose a side, to fight for their way of life. And this is freedom. Now I come to our today's situation. I think something very strange is happening now. More and more people think that they have to practice radical freedom, which means violating social rules and so on, to retain their liberty. The distinction is no longer clear. What do I mean by this? Think about the attack on Capitol on the 6th of January last year, 2021, when the mob of Trump supporters did something which was an act of freedom. They violated the rules of liberty, of social order. They occupied the Capitol. So they think that the only way to retain their liberty is to exercise freedom. I think that we, humanity, not just the developed world, are entering a new era in which liberal capitalism, as we knew it, is coming to an end. What it is replaced with is what some people call corporate neo-feudalism. It's a problematic term, but there is some truth in it. There is at least one thing about this neo-feudalism